For centuries, mankind has dreamed of the day we would unlock the secrets of another planet. That day has arrived.
When launch day comes and you see the smoke, the engines ignite, and you see the liftoff, your heart is beating pretty hard.
Walt Disney Pictures invites you to discover the mysteries of Mars.
Imagine your job is to build a robot to go to another world hundreds of millions of miles away and to explore that world. How do you build such a thing? How do you get it there?
See the red planet as it has never been seen before.
We as society can do something as incredible and difficult as landing something on Mars, then there is nothing that we can't do.
We've always talked about, wouldn't it be great for us to be on Mars? But we are on Mars. There's so much more over the horizon, and these rovers have discovered the magic of exploration.
From producer Frank Marshall and director George Butler, see the whole new world that awaits. Walt Disney Pictures presents Roving Mars. Now on Disney DVD.
Hello, my beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of the Happiest Cast on Earth, the show where we review anything and everything that was somehow released by the Walt Disney Corporation. I'm your host, as always, Ryan Johnson. Just me again. Nobody else. Sure does get lonely out here in space, which just so happens to be the subject of today's movie. That being the 2007 short documentary Roving Mars. I gotta be completely honest, I had no idea that this was a thing until the Wheel of Names selected it, and to be honest, it definitely intrigued me because Disney doesn't usually make documentaries that isn't about Disney. This was during that brief area where they were making those types of documentaries that weren't like about Disney or weren't like National Geographic, like Disney Nature type of thing, because Disney's been making like documentaries all the way back to like the 50s when Walt was still around with the True Life Adventures, but they stopped for a little bit. But then they started making, documentaries about like Disney animators and individual things about the company. And I guess sometime in the 2000s, they teamed up with IMAX, because this was exclusive to IMAX theaters, to create a 40-minute short film. Although I guess like 42 minutes is like the bare minimum something needs to be considered feature length. So this is technically a feature film all about the Mars rovers and how NASA created them to research on Mars. Because up until this point, and the documentary does mention this a few times, not a single human being had ever set foot on Mars, and to this day, not a single person has went to Mars. So having this be the subject of its own documentary, even if it's as short as 40 minutes long, is definitely fascinating, even if it technically is more of a commercial than a documentary when you really think about it. But I'm, of course, getting a little bit ahead of myself. So, what is Roving Mars? What is this movie about? Well, I pretty much already said so. Basically, NASA is trying to create these little robots that can go across Mars and that have cameras attached to them and are able to roam around the planet so that they can study it. And the way that they went about it is actually very, very fascinating, because they essentially made WALL-E. Yeah, because WALL-E is very much like based off of these rovers, I'm pretty sure. But I think prior to like when these things were made, the piece of pop culture that I can probably best compare it to is Short Circuit, because it looks like exactly like Johnny O5, I think its name was, from those movies. It's pretty uncanny when you really take a look at it. So the first half of the movie does follow NASA trying to build these robots and all of the various different types of ups and downs. Basically, like they need like a space geologist, and because they've had count them, two different missions to Mars in the past that have failed, they need a robot. And so they spent like the next 3 years making these cool space robots at the Kennedy Science Center. And it's really awesome in a way, like seeing NASA, the friggin' NASA try and create these robots in real time almost. One interesting thing about this documentary that I do want to note is that it technically doesn't have like a lead that it wants to follow, because like a lot of documentaries, like even though they're not like narrative traditional films, they do have a main central character that it's focusing on. Here the main character essentially is the rovers. The, we focus like extensively on the rovers. I guess you could say that it's also definitely like an ensemble piece, because we're watching all these different engineers and scientists try to create the robots. So for those of you unaware, the way that they decided to make the robots work, that they're going to like have two different robots go off at similar times but in different directions towards Mars, and they would leave these crafts and have parachutes that, I swear to God, looks exactly like cauliflower. Like, it was kind of uncanny how much it looked like cauliflower. I know that it was strategically designed to look like that for all of the necessary like scientific mumbo jumbo. Simple-minded YouTuber podcaster brain, I just saw cauliflower when I looked at it. They also gave the robot some arms and fingers so that they can examine all the different rocks, some cameras so that they can see, and some solar panels so that they can be powered by the sun. And they do explicitly state that once these guys are on Mars, they are never coming back to Earth. So these scientists are never going to look at their creations once they get shipped off into space, which, they do feel a little bit sentimental over the fact, because they did create these things and they are essentially their children. But hey, there's a bunch of photos of these things. How did they get them when they were all the way off in space? Well, it's simple there, you stupid children. They used the power of cutting-edge CGI to recreate them. This is definitely some 2007 CGI. This is the one part of the movie that definitely does grind my gears a little bit, because everything else is super fascinating, like just watching these robots get built and just seeing the ingenuity behind all of it. Like, it's really interesting stuff. But obviously they can't go to Mars to film this stuff, so they have to recreate it the most realistic way they can with CGI, and it so obviously looks like CGI. The technology for the engineering aspect was there, but the technology for the animation wasn't there yet, so it's such a back and forth between technological achievements. It's honestly dates the movie more than it probably would have. And I know that's weird to say for a movie that's specifically made for a certain point of time. This movie's on Disney Plus, and to my knowledge, Disney doesn't have any intention to remove it, so that's on them for preserving it. But I will give the animation this. What it is recreating is really cool. You know, it's recreating Mars from scratch and the robots to the most realistic details possible, and it can look really, really cool. But it's the back and forth. It keeps cutting back and forth between the actual photographs that the rover was able to capture and the ugly CGI rendering of Mars. And it's like night and day almost. It's objectively bad to look at. But hey, that's really just a nitpick for me. Now, the big reason most people will want to tune into any documentary is so that they can learn something about the subject at hand. And I did learn a couple things through this, mainly how long it took them to work on these, how long it took them to get from Earth to Mars at 7 months, and the fact that apparently, and this might make me sound really stupid and makes it sound like I didn't pay attention in science class, the rocks on Mars are just pure lava. They're just straight up pieces of lava. I did not know that prior to watching this. So there you go, movie. You taught me something that's pretty cool. One other really cool thing about this film is how it makes me get an emotional attachment to the rovers. Because, you know, earlier in the movie, you get attached to the rovers because, well, these scientists, you know, they get really attached to these rovers and they're like, I'm never going to be able to see these things again once they start to point for their existence. But then, once they actually get to Mars and they start working, the narrator is going off on how one day these things aren't going to work and solar energy can only go so far before these things just straight up die. And it made me feel like a bit of emotional attachment because on just one, how humanoid the robots look. I mean, the solar energies they have on like the top of them, they do look like eyes and they do look very animated even though they weren't made for that intention. And the fact that this movie came out in 2007, I did some additional research, and in 2019 both of these rovers did in fact die. The rovers were disabled in 2019 after a planet-wide dust storm. It blocked the sunlight from the panels and drained the battery completely. So these things are dead, which is a shame because I really did care about them in this film, and it sucks that they won't be able to do any more research. But the movie does end on a bit of an uplifting note on how, as NASA's technology and space travel has been able to progress further and further and further, that sometime in the future, not the near future, but definitely in the future somewhere, we will be able to do these without the need of robots. Oh boy. In these enlightened times of generative AI taking over everything, isn't that just the most realistic message to have? It's an uplifting one, but let's be honest with ourselves, it's not very realistic. But regardless on how realistic the closing remarks of this film are, I do still think that it overall is a very enjoyable film. From a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being a big giant Pooh Bear and 5 being a grand spanking castle, I would have to give this a 3, you know? It's not necessarily a subject that I would immediately click on, but it did keep my interest. It got me really invested into a subject that I would otherwise have zero interest in, and it made me feel an emotional connection to these robots that died 7 years ago. So, yeah, I think that it's a very solid, quick watch. So, definitely check it out, especially if you are in any way interested in space or NASA or anything like that. But anyway, guys, that will be it for this week's episode of the Happiest Cast on Earth. What do you guys think of Roving Mars? Please let me know. And also, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and to follow us on Spotify. I've been having weird issues with Spotify lately, which is why that the latest episode wasn't really on there, but I'm trying to figure that out, and if in the future I'm not going to be able to post on Spotify, then I will definitely let you know. Anyways, in other new stuff, I just put out a new Theater Talk Toon Talk crossover up on the Mr. Johnson channel, all about the weird early 2000s musical adaptation of The Sponge Who Could Fly that was only really in international markets, so that was definitely a fun video to make, so please check that out. And we will not be having an episode of the Happiest Cast on Earth next week, but we will have an episode of Moon Casting, that being the 1960s comedy Saintly Sinners. But until then, I will see you later. Bye!